I'm looking to hire 6 people in the next 3 months to help you make $200,000 a year with sales at LGFG Fashion House. You have 3 months. We're looking for 6 people. Apply now.
Okay. We're live. Welcome to the call. Give me a finger count, Henry. How many awesome people are watching us? Wow, that many fingers. That's right. Sometimes as our audience grows, I wish I could go back to Chernobyl and spend more time there so that I'll have more fingers to show you how many people are watching. Oh, those are the days. Today we're going to talk about how to fail creatively. How to fail, I should probably add creatively. Can you guys all see the board? Pretty clear, yeah? We're going to put create. Whoa. That is a failing pen right there. How to fail creatively. That's a good color, yeah. I like the idea of failing creatively much more than I like the idea of failure only, because as I've sort of spent the last 20 plus years, let's say, in the field of sales and building organizations and growing salespeople, there's been a pretty consistent pattern of what failure looks like, and that pattern never quite looks like what I thought it would look like 20 years ago. Our idea of a person who's a failure, or at least our intuitive idea of a person of what a failure looks like, is not exactly what a failure looks like. And now that I'm 40, I'll tell you guys a quick story. Like, I had a guy from my high school last week kill himself. And yeah, I know, it's hilarious. But the truth is, the dude was like not good at life. Like, he failed consistently. And so for a lot of us that have been watching, like on Facebook, we're like, yeah, like this isn't going to end up very, very good. Because we've seen this pattern. But when you're like, in high school, when you're 16 or 17, like you don't see those patterns just yet. But the truth is that success is really quite predictable. And failure is also really quite predictable once you know the pattern. Michael Franzese told me that people have patterns, and once you see their pattern, they're very easy to figure out what they're going to do next. And this guy was a captain in the mafia, basically, and so when he says that people have patterns and their patterns will tell you their next move, you listen with that with great intent, because that's a pretty serious and pretty credible thing to say for a guy that was capricciome in the mafia. And so I started looking for these patterns maybe 19, 18, 17 years ago, as I kind of saw people iterate out their lives and where they ended up. And it became extremely predictable. And so failure became easy to predict. But the thing about it is it doesn't look quite what you think it will look like. And I'm going to tell you guys what I see in patterns of failure so that maybe you can recognize some of these patterns in yourself and start to mitigate those patterns, because they always end up the same way. But the number one thing is really simple. Like, people who fail are in denial. People who fail are always in denial. And what I mean by always in denial is they just will completely fail to take any accountability over their failure. So the reasons for their failure, whether it's in business or whether it's in personal relationships, it's always some external factor which they can't, and I'll put in brackets, can't control. You see this, my classic example that I like to use is that 35-year-old single lady on Facebook, and if you're 35, you all have this girl on your Facebook, or there are many of them, and they're like, I'm leaving this city because all the men in this city suck. And I know Henry, my video guy, is laughing because he's seen that post many times. All of us that are in our 30s and beyond, we've seen this post many times now. It's like, I'm leaving the city because all the men in the city suck. It's like, really? Like, there's 2 million people in the city, and you've dated all the men, and they all suck. And once you cross this street right here, which separates the boundary of this city from the next city, then they stop sucking. Like, they collectively all decided to suck in this geographic area, but not that one. And we all have seen that lady move, and we all see what happens next, as the men still suck in the new city, apparently. But it just can't be her. It just can't be her. It has to be the world conspiring against her. And that's something we see. We also see that with guys, same thing. Oh, the women are like this. Like, they all teamed up and they all hate you, and it's their fault, right? It's like just the failure of making yourself attractive to the market is the real reason. And maybe it's not so obvious of how to make yourself attractive to the market. But failure always looks like a projection onto somebody or something else. And in the world of business, you see it's like, well, it's not me, it's the market. A lot of companies failed during the COVID pandemic. It's like, well, it's not me, it's the pandemic. That's why I lost my job. And I'm like, well, a lot of people didn't lose their jobs. And I was thinking about it earlier today, like we lost a few people during the COVID pandemic, but they were on their way out anyways. Like they weren't going to make it. Like COVID really accelerated a lot of things. It kind of fast forwarded a lot of things in business. But the businesses that failed, the people that failed, they were going to fail anyways. And I heard that very early on from somebody that's like a very high-ranking business person. And the more I observed, the more it became true that it was quite obvious what was going to happen. Because COVID was an ultimate excuse, right? It was like, well, I can't succeed because of this. I can't succeed in selling or recruiting. But a lot of people that went to work during COVID had record years, even in sales. Even some of you guys watching in our company and other companies had record years. Because winners are the opposites of losers, right? So it's like winners will not project the market as being the cause. Winners will project the market as just something they need to master in order to gamify and win, right? So it's like, it's not that all men or all women are the problem. It's like you're the problem and you just haven't figured out how to talk to all men and all women, because if they all collectively make the mind up to reject you, they can also all collectively make the mind up to accept you and welcome you if you're the right person to accept and welcome, right? So people who fail, they're in denial. They find external factors for what they cannot control. And I said can't in brackets. Because a lot of times, it's not that they can't control it, it's that they choose to not control it, or they choose to see the full truth. They see things in narrow windows, right? And an example of seeing things in narrow windows, of being in denial, is finding something wrong as an excuse. This is a huge one, by the way. Finding something wrong is an excuse to do nothing. I'll give you an example. This is a really common one right here. Like circle this one, because this one I see a lot of failures. Finding something wrong is an excuse to do nothing. I'll give you an example. Like I had a call this morning, and you know, it's a very typical problem. Like, hey, we have all these people you can call. Yeah, but some of the numbers don't work. Okay. You know, it's like, here's a list of prospects to call. Yeah, but some of the prospects already have left the company. They're a different company now. Here's a street with doors to knock on. Yeah, but some people aren't home during the day. It's like you find something wrong. You find something wrong as an excuse to do nothing. You see this a lot with people who are particularly bad at following any sort of leadership. Like what they'll do is they'll find a flaw in the leadership as an excuse to follow no leadership at all, right? Which is why as leaders we try to make ourselves people that others want to follow, because people typically will try to find reasons not to. So it's like, hey, like here's what you should do. Yeah, but one time 7 years ago I saw you do something different. It's like, well then just don't do anything ever. It's like, hey, go outside to get groceries. Yeah, but sometimes there's typhoons. Well, don't ever buy groceries. Just die. Starve to death in your house alone. You know, go talk to that girl. Yeah, but what if she doesn't like me? That's a risk all the time. Stop talking to any women. Don't talk to anyone, in fact. Just die alone with cats eating your body. Like whatever, right? And so finding something wrong as an excuse to do nothing is a very common way that people fail creatively. Because what happens is, if something's wrong and therefore that's my excuse to not do anything, it's not my fault that I failed, and right away an external factor appears. It's not my fault that the leads aren't perfect. It's not my fault that the market is closing for whatever. It's not my fault that the weather is bad. It's not my fault, okay? And the best thing about failure is this. There's always a convenient excuse. There's always a convenient excuse. Always a convenient excuse, right? And it's much easier to convince yourself to believe a convenient excuse than to believe this bad boy over here, inconvenient truth. The inconvenient truth, right? And what's interesting to me is how angry people get. How angry people get when the inconvenient truth is told to them. There's a really great, I can't remember if this is a Thomas Sowell quote. It might be. It might have come from a book that I read recently, a very good book. And it said something like, if you tell people that they failed because of factors that are beyond their control, they will love you. So you see this a lot, like propagated by tyrants. They're like, oh, you know, we can't succeed when you have, I don't know, institutional racism or something. And people are like, yeah, that's why I'm a failure. It's because of that. And then people rally behind that because people love attributing their personal failures to something else. But he said, if you really want to start a revolution, tell people they failed because of their personal choices. Like, well, maybe you just made bad decisions. What? That person's blah, blah, blah. And then they start. So it's like, there's no better way to be hated than by telling people the inconvenient truth. Because people hate to see themselves as the source of their failure. It's cognitive dissonance, right? They want to project the failure on something else. And so what happens is, and I'll give you an example from our company, and I had a long talk with one of my friends yesterday. He's a very high-level executive at a very prestigious financial institution. And we had this about an hour, 20-minute conversation. And it went something like this, you know. So you get some, let's say a salesperson comes in, and they're objectively bad at their role. And when I say by objectively bad, like they're not going to get any kind of consistent high-level results because the processes they're following are not correct. And then you administer training. And the training doesn't work right away, obviously, because we talked about on the last call, like you can't learn how to sell in 2 months. It's a lifelong endeavor. It's like being a doctor or being a pilot. You can't learn to be a commercial pilot in 2 months. You know? And you administer training, and it doesn't work right away. And then the person starts to resist the training and going back to their old ways. But of course, the old ways aren't going to get consistent high-level results. Otherwise, they wouldn't be entry-level as they are. And then they are told the truth, like, hey, you're doing it wrong, but they refuse to take the truth. And then when they leave the company, they're like, the product sucks, and the market sucks, and the training sucks, and the leadership sucks. And that person that's undermining all the things that apparently in their mind sucks, that person themselves is not successful. Right? So it's like a loser blaming everybody but themselves, and they're making it very public, and they're very angry, and they just want to tell the world how bad everybody is but them. And it's like my favorite, you know, review on our Glassdoor, which is somebody like, companies should pay market rates. I'm like, we're a commission sales company. You got exactly your market rate. If you were making lower than minimum wage, then you're really bad at sales. Because it's like if you're a realtor and you sell 0 houses and you're like, RE/MAX should pay market rates. It's like they do. So you can't sell anything. And so people will reject the source of truth because it's inconvenient for them, right? Because the convenient excuse is so easy to buy into, and therefore people who fail are in denial. And so you get external factors. You get external factors because people who fail are in denial. So let's move to part 2 of the call. And by the way, I should point out, this is not a principle you can internalize and just know. Like, I've seen people who have been successful at one thing fail at another thing because they were in denial about the next thing. I've seen the people that are successful in sales fail in leadership because they're in denial about leadership. Like, this is something that basically persists until the maximum level you can achieve for yourself. Like, I've seen people that are good in sales can't get into leadership. People that are good in leadership can't get into scaling an organization, etc. And it goes all the way up the chain from there. And the point at which it's no longer your fault, like, that's where you can't grow anymore. Like, the moment you're like, well, it's not me, that's it. Like, growth is finished, growth is over. Like, it's just always you. Like, it's just always you. And you should be so fortunate to have somebody that will tell you an inconvenient truth that's credible enough to tell you the truth, meaning that they've shown consistent high-level results in the thing you're pursuing. And it has to be somebody that's shown consistent high-level results. Like, I had a call this morning again. I told some new people, I'm like, don't talk to the new people about helping you. They don't know. Like, if you're going to the person that sells nothing to tell you how to do things better, you're an idiot. Like, why would you go to a person that produces no results? Like, it's just the dumbest thing you can do, right? But people who fail are in denial. And it is quite a lot easier to listen to the person who sells nothing, because that person will sell you the dumbest thing ever and you're going to buy it. It's like, well, it's not really your fault. The system's broken. Oh, okay. Thanks, guy who sold nothing. Now I'll go fail just like you because I want your life. Retarded. People who fail are in denial. So there's really two kinds of failure, and I'm going to tell you guys what they are. There's unconscious failure, and there's conscious failure. And most failure is unconscious. What that means is you're doing dumb things. You're doing dumb things, but you don't know they're dumb. You don't know because nobody told you. So for example, maybe you're selling on the phone and you're really bad on the phone. You're like, hi, how are you today? I'm a salesperson. Like you're sounding dumb, but you don't know that it's dumb, and so you keep doing it. And so what happens with unconscious failure is you work really hard. So you work really hard, but you're not effective. Your effectiveness is bad. And so you work really hard. And so you've seen people that work really hard, but they're like, they do the most demos, the most everything, but they don't get results. It's because they are unconsciously incompetent. Like they're doing things wrong and they don't even know they're wrong. And a lot of times, most of the time, just nobody's told them that it's wrong. So they just do whatever they do. So they just keep repeating stupidity over and over and over. And that's, and what I've noticed about unconscious failure is that it's more common than you think it is. Like for the most part, you think that things are very obvious to you, therefore they're obvious to everybody, and they're not. Especially leaders see this all the time. You're like, yeah, you know, my rookie's doing something profoundly stupid. It's got to be negligent. I'm like, is it negligent, or are they just not aware that it's really stupid? And then you find out that it's like I'll give you an example. Like I have a guy that might be in Bulgaria as an example, and they're calling prospects in Germany and they're on a different time zone. Like Germany may be 1 hour behind. And then when that rookie gets a booking, they send a calendar invite and they put Bulgaria time zone. And the guy in Germany is like, he's in Germany, he's like, why is he inviting me on Bulgaria time zone? Like they don't even change the calendar to the same time zone, so they lose trust with the prospect. The prospect's like, this is kind of crazy. What am I being scammed? Like what's happening? And it's such an obvious, stupid mistake. And you would think it's almost negligent and malicious, but the rookie is just genuinely unaware. Like they're so unconsciously incompetent that it's like, dude, you can't do that. They're like, oh, really? Okay. So that would be an example. So quite a lot of times you really have to over-explain things to new people in a business because they genuinely just are completely a blank slate, and they will do the most preposterous. Like I'll give another example. I think I used this on the last call when like a rookie was calling, and she asked like, hey, if you see a couple of suits you like, would you give me a shot? Like the closing question. And the prospect's like, yeah, why not? And she's like, let's not meet. I'm like, why did you hang up? She's like, well, he said not. I'm like, why not means yes. So like, but just inspecting the process, something we covered on the last call, just uncovered a profoundly stupid thing that the rookie was doing unconsciously. She was working really, really hard. She wasn't very effective. And so if somebody's working really hard, but they're not effective, I can work with that person, right? Because it's like, hey, like you're not effective, but you're working hard. Let's make sure that we unpeel this onion, layer over and over. We've got to unpeel a few layers here because you're working hard and you're unconsciously incompetent. And we can make you at least consciously incompetent, at least like you know that you're wrong and why, and we're going to help you improve that, right? So you go from unconscious incompetent to conscious incompetent. Now, conscious incompetent is you are being told the truth. You're being told the truth. Like somebody credible is telling you the truth. Somebody credible is telling you the truth, okay? And then you make a choice, right? Now you're consciously incompetent. You make a choice. You're like, either don't believe the competent. This is a very common one. Or just don't action it. And I'll explain both. So you're being told the truth by somebody that's obviously competent. And why do you know it's the truth? Because somebody competent is communicating to you. If like LeBron James is teaching you like how to play basketball, that is an observably competent person, and you should probably listen to LeBron James teaching you how to play basketball, right? But this is where you get into the conscious incompetence, where people are like, okay, I'm being told how to do something correctly by somebody who's quite competent at it, but I'm making a choice to not believe that person. And we never say like, I don't believe that person. It's never quite that direct. It's a lot more creative than that. It's more like, well, let me check what that competent person is saying against somebody else's opinion. And what you do is you go to somebody incompetent. You're like, hey, you know, my VP sales said this, but you, guy who's been here 2 weeks and probably won't last very long, what do you think? And the guy's like, oh, well, you know, there's one thing wrong, so the whole thing can't work. And you're like, oh, okay. And then you lent any level of, any level of credence to the incompetent because it's easier for you to accept than the inconvenient truth. And you're like, well, I know that my VP sales, who's been doing this 45 years and is one of the most successful humans ever in this field, like I know that LeBron James is telling me that this is the way to position yourself as a point guard, but this person that's never played basketball before and is going to get cut from the team soon, you know, they're saying that maybe not so much. And so people who fail creatively are like, you know, I'm going to trust the person that knows nothing. In fact, I'll even back it up. I'll go on the internet and Google it. And I had a really good example of this where about 4 or 5 years ago, we were hired by a translations company in Canada to help them build their sales approach. So they literally just hired one of our people as a consultant, like my CEO was hired as a consultant with my blessing on this because I knew the company. And they're like, hey, we're reaching out on social media to book appointments with a product that we think people will buy, but we're not getting any meetings. Like, okay. So all we did is we redid their script. Like we're quite familiar at how to write a script, even on social. And so we started approaching. We gave them, they hired a person, we gave them a script on LinkedIn and they started approaching. And we gave them, here's the people you target, here's the job position. We even gave them a prospect list. And the first week they booked 4 appointments, which was more appointments than they booked all of the previous last month. Like their record previously was 2 appointments a month. First week they booked 4, second week they booked 4, third week they booked 4. And so in the entire first month they booked 16 appointments, whereas previously I think 1 or 2 was the monthly record. And then the CEO of that company, who was not in sales, was incompetent. She's like, yeah, I don't like this approach, change it. We're like, why? She goes, it's not friendly enough. What do you mean? She's like, well, you're just saying, hey, here's what I do and here's why I want to talk to you and here, blah, blah, blah. But you're not asking them, like, I'm like, and we just caught on a call, where are you getting this information? She's like, well, I read this article that, you know, you should say, hey, I see you went to this university. Are you still following the football team? I'm like, you don't open with that. Because, anyways, so they gave us like a bunch of money and we said, we're not working with you anymore because she decided that she would much rather focus on the incompetent that got her no results, and obviously that whole thing failed, versus the competent that actually got the results. She trusted the wrong source. Right? And why? Well, she understood something was wrong. She was confronted that she was doing something stupid. So she became conscious to her incompetence. And then she had a choice. The choice is, I'm being told the truth by somebody credible. Am I going to believe that person? Or am I going to choose the incompetent to believe because it's easier for me to fail and blame somebody else? And she chose to fail and blame somebody else. It wasn't that she chose to fail. It's just she chose to fail creatively. Like in her mind, she's like, well, these results don't work. It's like, yeah, but the results are clearly there and it's working and we're showing you what to do and how to get better. Yeah, but you know, I don't like this one thing, so we can't do the whole thing. Okay. So that is a very common way to creatively fail. It's just I fail to receive the information from the competent party. I'll go sniff out their BS, wink, wink, with somebody less competent. And obviously the incompetent person will give you conflicting information to the competent person, obviously. Because if the incompetent person was competent, they would view the world differently, would they not? And you guys see this all the time, right? Like you get a sales job and then your stupid uncle is like, let me tell you how the company should do it. Or some retard prospect. I get this one a lot. The prospect's like, you know, if you just lowered your prices, you'd sell more. You know? And then the incompetent idiot salesperson's like, hey, sales manager, what do you think? A sales manager is good. He's like, yeah, no. Like, we have lots of clients that pay this and more. This is dumb, poor-ass prospect. And the salesperson's like, okay. And then they go to their friend who just started. What do you think? Yeah, you know, I'm having a hard time. Guys say it's too expensive. You're right. You know? And then both of them are losers. Both of them leave. The company continues to grow and kick ass everywhere it goes, right? And the losers are like, yeah, but they suck. It's like, well, the market disagrees. Like, you got rejected by the market and they didn't, so you're the incompetent person, right? So pay attention, right? If you're being told the truth by somebody credible, if you don't believe the competent, you're naturally going to believe the incompetent. And that's a bad sign, man. That's a bad sign. But that's not the only way people fail creatively, right? So you could choose to not believe the competent. The other thing is, you want to believe the competent. You want to believe the competent, but you just don't take action. And I see this all the time. So before I started LGFG, I had a short 6-month career in a sales consulting company that had just started up. They're still around. They're still doing well. And one of the things that bothered me, and I was selling, I was doing fine, you know, but one of the things that bothered me is we were selling conference tickets at the time to this success conference where, you know, like speakers would come in and give like speeches about like how to succeed. And so we sold some tickets and some people showed up and they were like, yeah, I'm so excited about success, woo. And then a couple of months later in a adjoining city, we had another conference. We sold 4,000 or 5,000 tickets and some people showed up and it was the same people, woo, yeah. And we had another conference a couple of months later, again, not too far away, and the same damn people showed up and they were so excited and motivated and riled up to get all this information about success. And then I talked to their sales manager and he was like, yeah, you know, I'm not going to pay for these people to go anymore because they go and absorb everything, but they never change anything after any conference. And so then I talked to the ownership of the company and I was like, do you guys see this pattern? They're like, yeah. They're like, we know that in the success industry, that's the industry that kind of sells you the self-help stuff, only about 1% of people ever get value out of it, and that's just part of it. It's like a medicine that works on 1 out of 100 people because people just don't take the medicine. Which is actually a very common cause of failure in medicine. People don't take it, right? Like Jordan Peterson writes about this in chapter 2 of 12 Rules for Life, right? That people would rather administer medicine to their dog than to themselves. And it kind of bothered me a lot because like what I saw were not successful people. What I saw were not salespeople. What I saw were not business people. What I saw were people who identified as successful people. What I saw were people who identified as salespeople. They identified as business people, but they weren't those things, right? They weren't the things they identified as, but they identified as those things because they wanted the social validation of feeling like they were. Does that make sense? They wanted the social validation. But so they took the information, but they never actioned it. And in my old life as a book door-to-door salesman, I saw this when people went out, sold a couple of weeks and quit, and then told everybody they did the program and acted like an alumni. Or they did one terrible summer where they sucked, but they still took all the privilege of being the alumni, even though they never mastered or even competently were able to do anything within that program, but they still have the entitlement of somebody like they're a rock star at that program, yet they weren't, right? It's like the guy that, I've seen this by the way, it's not even a joke, it's like, you know, summer internship at trillion or multi-billion-dollar company, and I'm like, were you at McDonald's? They're like, yeah. I'm like, that's a lot of privilege to take from working at McDonald's. Just say you were flipping burgers, man. But the thing is that people want to believe whatever they hear, but they don't action it. So, and this is where we get into a problem, right? Because everybody in our organization that's unconsciously incompetent, I'll say, hey, this is wrong. And I'll do my best to explain why it's wrong. And by the way, you guys know the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? People who are so incompetent at a thing, they don't know that they're so incompetent, so they don't even know what competence looks like. So when you explain to them that they're incompetent, they might not necessarily believe you because they don't know the difference between competent and incompetent, right? It's like explaining, trees from a planet you've never been on. It's like, this is a tree. Well, that looks like a boat to me. Yeah, but on this planet, it's a tree. And they're like, huh? It's like, well, you don't know the rules in a different galaxy. Like, it's just the rules can be totally different. Who the hell knows, right? Just totally different rules. And so the Dunning-Kruger effect is like, okay, well, you're explaining to somebody they're incompetent, and they want to even believe you. And you say, okay, look, you can't do it like this. You got to do it like that. They're like, oh, okay. And then, or they understand why they're incompetent, whatever. And then when it comes time to like show me what you did, they don't change anything. And this is where people, this is where the failing point stops. Like this is where you go from acting like a failure to actually becoming a failure. Like this is where everything breaks down, right? I've had this conversation literally driving to work today where I'm like talking to somebody on the phone that's a leader. I'm like, yeah, you know, I have a rookie and I told them this is what they need to do. And we had that conversation. They're like, yes, I get it. And then their actions don't change. And by the way, it takes 7 times before somebody gets, you know, this is from a couple calls ago, it takes 7 times of repeating something before they kind of understand that you're telling them. It's like, hey, we had this conversation before, here's what you need to do. They're like, okay, and then they still don't do it. And then you're like, hey, we've had this conversation a couple times, here's what needs to happen for you to grow. And they're like, okay, and then they still don't do it. So it's like they want to believe you and they listen to the information, they absorb it, but they just don't change anything in their actions at all. And then you have another conversation, they still don't change. And that's when creative failure just becomes failure. It's like, okay, we now understand, because we've dug in specifically, we now understand what the problem is. I.e., as a leader, my responsibility is to bring you to conscious incompetence, right? Like, we now understand why you're failing. I've inspected your work. I've looked through the processes and systems and things. I've told you exactly what needs to happen. We've repeated it multiple times, and that's the process for leadership, right? We've inspected. Like, we've done our work as a leader. We didn't just say, hey, go succeed, and then give them no tools, because they're going to be hardworking and ineffective, and eventually, like, they're going to realize it doesn't work. But I've inspected, I've looked into, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, here's how you improve. And they're like, okay. And after a few conversations, they just don't change. So now they know what's wrong, and you ask them, what's wrong? Well, you told me to do this, and I'm not, it's not, okay. And then usually it's like, but the reason, it's like, no, there's no reason why you didn't do it. You just didn't figure out how to do it. That's the reason. You know what you need to do. They still refuse to do it. And that's when you have a different conversation, right? That's when it's like, hey, man, we inspected. We know what the problem is. We both agreed on our terms of moving forward and progress. We both agreed on what we want. We both agreed on what you need to do to get what you want, but you're just not doing it. So maybe now it's time to talk about an exit. Because, how much can I put into the pool? How much energy, how much time and resources can I spend when you completely understand what you need to do right now, and you're telling me there's no reason for you not to do it, and you just don't do it? And that's when I know that I have a cancer in the organization, and that cancer will get cut out. Because it's like, why, it's like, how much energy do you want to invest into something that just fails to achieve anything? Doesn't want to do it? It's like, well, yeah, but, and it's like, look, we know the problem. We know the problem. We know the problem. Here we know the problem. And we know there are obstacles to overcoming that problem. And there could be 100 obstacles or 1,000,000 obstacles, doesn't matter. We know that these obstacles can produce excuses, right? We know that every obstacle can produce an excuse, and it could be just one obstacle to not do everything, whatever. But we also know that what we need to do is somewhere here. But you refuse. And that's when we have a problem. That's when we say, hey, we've addressed the problem many times. At this point, you should understand exactly what the problem is, but you refuse to change. And that's fine. And that's fine. But the business relationship will not move forward. And that's just how it is. And that's creative failure, guys. So understand, again, people who fail are in denial. They're projecting. They're using cognitive dissonance to project that the failure is not due to them. It's due to some factor they made up. Doesn't matter what it is. It's always the market, the system, the leadership, the timing, the product, whatever, some problem. And, and in the perfect world, I guess the solution would be to enter the perfect market with the perfect product, with the perfect timing, with the perfect leadership, perfect company, perfect everything. And how do you know it's perfect? Because everything's easy and there's no challenges. And if it was easy and there was no challenges, of course, you'd get another problem is unlimited competition. And that would be a big problem. That would be a big problem, right? Oh, but I also wanted no competition. I want an easy market, best prospects, everything works, easy to sell, market wants it badly, and 0 competitors. It's just us. Nobody wants to enter the market but us. Mwah. It's like, good luck finding that, right? So you move from unconscious to conscious. You say, here are the issues, and we need to draw them out. And then you make a choice. Do I believe the competent or the incompetent? That will determine your future. And then choice 2 is, do I change my actions in order to improve my outcomes, or do I keep doing the same things and then blame somebody else why it's not working? And that's creative failure, folks. I hope you recognize some signs. We're done.